In the far north of Scotland, hidden behind miles of frozen forest, stood a palace called Eldridge Hall. Locals said no one had lived there for more than 100 years. The windows were shattered, ivy climbed the walls like veins, and the gates had rusted so badly they screamed whenever the wind pushed them. One winter evening, a young travel vlogger named Clara Evans arrived there. She wanted to explore the forgotten palace and film it for her new YouTube channel. She had heard the legends that the last owner, Lord Eldridge, vanished during a snowstorm along with his entire family, but she never believed such stories. She only believed in views and subscribers. As she stepped through the broken gates, her camera light flickered. The path to the main door was buried under frost, and the silence was so heavy she could hear her own heartbeat. She pushed open the palace door, and it echoed through the empty hall like a scream. Inside, the palace was still, alive. Furniture was covered with white sheets, chandeliers hung low with cobwebs, and portraits stared at her from the dark walls. In the main ballroom, she found something strange. Every mirror was covered with black cloth. Curious, Clara pulled one down. Her reflection looked back at her, but the eyes were slightly off. As she tilted her head, the reflection didn't move. It just smiled. Startled, she laughed nervously and turned away, pretending it was a camera glitch. But when she looked again, the reflection was gone. Only the empty ballroom stared back. She checked her footage. Her reflection never appeared at all. Only the room, and behind her, a second shadow moving on its own. Panic began to rise, but curiosity was stronger. She went upstairs, where she found a long corridor lined with doors. On one door, she noticed a brass plate engraved with the words, "Lord Eldridge's Study." The door creaked open before she even touched it. A fireplace burned faintly, though there was no wood, no match, and no smoke. Papers were scattered across the desk, and one page caught her eye. It was a letter, half-burned, that said, "If anyone enters this house after midnight, they belong to it." The clock on the wall began to tick. She looked up. It was 11:59. When the hand reached midnight, every door in the corridor slammed shut. The mirrors downstairs shattered one by one. The reflection returned, standing in the study doorway, smiling, holding her camera. Then it whispered in her voice, "Let's finish the video." The next morning, villagers saw her car still parked near the forest. The camera was found beside the palace gate, covered in frost. The footage showed the same ballroom, the same mirror, and at the end, a reflection waving goodbye, even though no one stood in front of the glass. The Queen's Guest. It was late autumn when Eleanor and James Whitford, a couple from London, decided to take a quiet holiday in Cornwall. Away from the noise of the city, they wanted somewhere peaceful, something with history and character. They found it online, Ravensshire Palace, a centuries-old royal residence turned into a guest house. The pictures were beautiful. Gold ceilings, long hallways, antique furniture, and sea cliffs stretching beyond the windows. The price was suspiciously cheap, but the reviews were glowing. They booked it immediately. When they arrived, the palace looked far grander than the photos. The air smelled of salt and old wood. At the entrance stood an old caretaker, Mr. Halden, thin as a shadow with pale gray eyes. "You're the only guests tonight," he said with a stiff smile. Dinner will be served at 7. And one more thing. He paused. Please, don't enter the locked room upstairs. Her Majesty's chamber. Eleanor laughed softly, thinking he was just playing into the old theme. We promise, she said. That night, they had dinner in the great hall, with candles flickering in tall silver stands. The caretaker didn't join them. He just stood quietly at the door watching them eat. When they asked about the palace's history, his answer was always the same. It once belonged to a queen who never left. Later, as the storm outside grew wild, the couple went upstairs to their room. The hallways stretched endlessly, portraits of solemn-faced nobles staring down at them. One portrait caught Eleanor's eye, a young queen wearing a black crown. Her eyes looked almost alive, following her down the corridor. At midnight, a sound woke Eleanor. It was the faint rustling of fabric, like someone pacing in a heavy gown. Then came a voice, soft, broken, and close. Where is my crown? She sat up. James was asleep. The sound came from the locked door at the end of the corridor. Without thinking, she took the key from their table, one that the caretaker had left for emergency use. The door opened on its own. Inside was a cold, candlelit room. A throne stood in the center, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was thick, the smell of perfume long dead. On the throne sat a skeleton in a royal gown, still wearing a silver crown. Eleanor gasped, and the skeleton's head slowly turned toward her. The voice came again, clearer now. I waited for my guests. The door slammed shut behind her. James woke to the sound of her scream. He ran through the corridor, banging on the locked door, shouting her name. When he finally broke it open, the room was empty. The throne was empty too. Only the crown lay on the floor, dripping with something dark. When the caretaker arrived, his face went pale. I told you not to open it, he whispered. James looked at him, trembling. Where's my wife? The old man turned slowly toward the wall, where a new portrait now hung. It showed the queen smiling gently from her throne, and beside her, a new figure in royal robes. Eleanor, her eyes lifeless, her smile eternal. The caretaker whispered, Her Majesty has found her guest. The lost guests. Fog covered the hills that night, thick, pale, and endless. 3 friends, Aidan, Mia, and Lucas, were driving through the countryside, looking for an old palace they'd booked online. It was supposed to be a luxury remote getaway, completely cut off from city noise. The road was empty for miles. Their GPS had stopped working an hour ago, and there was no signal. Just when they began to think they were lost, a gate appeared from the fog. Tall iron bars, carved with the words Wyndham Palace. Aidan, the most adventurous of them, smiled. Finally, told you it exists. The gate creaked open by itself. The palace beyond was massive, white stone walls, black roofs, and tall windows glowing faintly from the inside. But there were no cars, no signs of life, and the silence was unnatural, as if the fog swallowed every sound. Inside, the lights were already on. A dining table was set for 3, with candles flickering and plates steaming with food. Someone must have set this up for us, Mia said, though her voice trembled slightly. But no one answered when they called out. They ate, laughed nervously, explored the halls. pretending the strangeness was part of the fun. Then Lucas noticed something odd. The portraits on the walls were changing. At first, they showed strangers, kings, queens, servants. But as the night went on, the faces began to look familiar. The eyes, the hair, the clothes. By midnight, the portraits were of them. Aiden, Mia, and Lucas, painted in royal attire, centuries old. Aiden froze in front of his painting. I don't remember taking this photo. The air grew colder. The candles flickered violently, then went out. In the darkness, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow, heavy, deliberate. A door at the end of the corridor opened by itself. "Welcome," a voice said softly. "You've arrived home." They ran toward the exit, but the front door was gone. In its place was a wall of stone. Every corridor led back to the same ballroom, where their portraits hung larger than before. Mia began to cry. Lucas grabbed her hand, whispering, "It's just a dream." Then they saw Aiden, standing in front of his portrait, staring blankly at it. His reflection inside the painting moved its eyes, smiled, and reached out. Aiden screamed as the painting's hand pulled him inside. The canvas rippled like water, and he was gone. Only his crown remained, lying on the marble floor. Mia and Lucas backed away, but the walls began to shift. The palace itself was alive, breathing, whispering. Voices filled the air. "Stay, you belong to us now." One by one, their reflections vanished from every mirror. The palace fell silent again. The next morning, a group of hikers found the car still parked outside the gates. But there was no palace anymore, only empty hills and fog. That night, when one of the hikers looked back from the road, he saw a faint light far away, deep in the mist. A shadowy building stood there for a moment, tall, bright, beautiful. And in one of its windows, 3 figures waved, smiling like they'd never left.